Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the co-host of Pod TV's World Edition. On World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about innovation and what we can do to build back better and stronger together as a world after the COVID pandemic. Today, my monologue is coming from the heart. I got home very late last night and wasn't able to really prepare a monologue, but I think what I have to say can connect with each and every one of you. Yesterday, I had the honor of having lunch and meeting for the first time Nick Paladiva, Kimberly Calhoun. I'd met Mark Lee before for coffee, but it was him and with Jatovi Duffy, all of us members of the IBM TV Pod TV family. I must say, on my way to Durham to the Washington Duke Inn, I was a little bit nervous. I had butterflies in my stomach. It had been a while since I've driven 35 minutes in a car to meet someone, to get out without a mask, sit down, have lunch. And I tell you, it felt absolutely wonderful. Just enjoyed meeting everyone, smiling without a mask on my face, interacting, learning from each other, and just seeing the expressions of joy from my other colleagues who I think felt the same way. On my way back, I started to think to myself, what will the new normal be like? How will we get back to being in crowds together and enjoying golf and enjoying our smiles and enjoying our interactions? Because at the end of the day, I truly believe we are social creatures. But at the same time, I ask myself, have we changed the way we will work? I'll give you another example. 2 days ago, I had a call for a business meeting. It was an optional meeting I could have gone to downtown Raleigh for the meeting. But I decided not to take the 30 minutes to drive to find parking, meet for 30 minutes, and drive back. That 90 minutes I could use for more work. I could take my power nap, and I could get back to do different things. At the end of the day, as I close out this monologue, my point is making that we don't know what a new normal will be like. But that's what makes emerging from this pandemic very exciting. I pray for those who have lost loved ones, and we pray for those empty hearts and empty seats at the table. But one thing is certain, for those of us who have survived this pandemic in America, we can now move forward with greater appreciation for the things that we took for granted, excited for the adventures that lay ahead, and continued prayers for our colleagues around the world, particularly in India, who are grappling with this deadly monster, COVID-19. At the end of the day, I believe cities will rebound faster than we've ever imagined. As I still today see in our own state of North Carolina, restaurants filling up, concerts returning, people traveling for Memorial Day, and even Michael Landgraf last night, in a meeting with me at a board meeting I attended for our town of Morrisville, said that air travel is back, restaurants are packed in the airport, lines are long, but get this, 80% of projected travel this year will be leisure travel, with only 20% business. Will people start using more remote work techniques and travel less? Only time will tell. But please, join me in welcoming the United States of America back to a post-pandemic world where there is light at the end of the tunnel and a smile on our face. Thank you, Mark. And we have a special guest today. We're waiting for Fran Ferris-Ockwell, I think. But Mark, come on and we can begin the show.
Yes, I'll definitely gladly join the show and everything. And we've actually also got Sasha Starr with us as well. So we'll bring Sasha on and see what he's got to say. And by the way, it was great seeing you there at that meeting. And it was great to be there with you. And you also forgot that we had the Funk Master, Mr. Zach, there with us well as Jatovi's young son, and he's actually got 2 kids, but it was great seeing the young son there as well. But yes, it was great meeting the bosses. That was actually my first time meeting them as well. So like I said, I've met you a couple of times, and Zach just lives around the corner from me, literally. Like, we live one building over from each other, so we see each other quite often. But there was, and of course, Jatovi's here in Durham, so I've seen him a couple of times, but I think this might have been the first time since the pandemic that we've actually been face to face as well. So it was good getting out and being out and about and being there at the Washington Duke Inn. Actually, the last time I was there, actually dealt with something that deals even with race relations. And I know that we just dealt with George Floyd and all of that, but I think the last time I was at the Washington Duke was when they were having a commemoration for the takeover of the Allen Building, and that was by some of the African American students. And I believe it was either the late '60s or the early '70s, and that kind of helped share put on the integration of Duke. So it actually helped prompt some of them getting more African American students there, and also getting some of the programs that they've got that explore African American history and things along that line. So that was a little bit of history, and they were having a 50th year anniversary, and that might have been about a year or two ago. I know it was definitely before the pandemic, and that was the last time that I was at the Washington Duke. So I was glad to go back there. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, but the Washington Duke had actually had a fire. So they had actually been closed there for a while because of that had happened some time back as well. So they were actually shut down doing some renovations. So like I said, it was good seeing them, and it looks like a lot of people were there attending various meetings. So that was definitely good seeing people out and about. So Sasha, glad that you're here with us as well. And I
Thank
was
you.
wondering how things are going in your life, because things are always jumping over there in Canada. As a matter of fact, one of my cousins just came down, unfortunately, for a sad occasion. I think I might have mentioned this in a show a couple of weeks ago, but he came for a sad occasion because his father had passed away, which is my uncle, but he had passed away, and he came down for the service because my cousin Will actually lives in Canada, because he is definitely part of the community of folks that consider themselves First Nation and all of that. And definitely, he's got a wife that is of the First Nation or the Native American, Native Canadian population there in Canada. So he's actually got his own Canadian company that sells like Native American wear and all of that. So it was good to know that he's doing well and that his business is doing well. But he had to come down to lay his father to rest, and that was about a week and a half ago. So definitely good seeing that he's at least got his business going, and that he's enjoying his Canadian life there with his wife and the rest of the family and all of that. But just want to know how things are going in your life.
Thank you. First of all, my condolences, of course, for the death of a member of your family. And Canada, in fact, has the longest lockdown of all nations, I believe. It's still on until at least mid June. Now, in mid June, I think things will start probably open here and there, but in very slow fashion. Schools are closed, and it's not even confirmed that they will reopen in September. Maybe not. So it is still quite grave situation here. But hopefully things will start turn for the best, because I can't see how it could be worse than it is now. It's really hard to say. Steve, speaking about your speech, I noticed a very interesting thing about the business meetings and business travel is not going to come back as well and as quickly as the
Yeah,
leisure travel.
and I
I
yeah
think it's a
yeah
very good observation. And to tell you the truth, the less business travel there will be, the better is for everybody. I'll tell you why. People, without almost without exception, people are all corrupt, including the all the top managers of the corporations. So when they have meeting face to face, there is a lot of room for corruption to try to make some kind of sideway deals and some additional deals and some word of mouth deals and all kind of things. Whereas on Zoom, everything is recorded. It's so difficult to be corrupted on Zoom. It's
Yeah.
next to
And,
impossible.
yeah, that's why I made my point, and I hope you all enjoyed my monologue. It was a little bit more from the heart, sort of having a
Yeah,
conversation.
no, there's nothing wrong with that. Very good
No,
monologue.
sometimes I haven't been able to prepare as much recently. I've been very busy, but the point I was trying to make is that, and I'm Sasha, I feel like I did a good job because I connected with you. I have a lot
Okay,
of I have a lot of respect for you, and I think that
thank you.
the fact that you listened into what I was saying means that I actually did a good job, right? Because
You
I
did.
was I was
You did.
talking to you. But the point I was trying to make is that, you know, and I think that might be a good thing to do about the show is just to have a conversation as we emerge out of the pandemic. Um, how have our lives changed, right? So the small little things, like for example, people may not travel as much to get on a plane to do business when, like Sasha said, they can do recorded calls. They may not go until they sign the contract, but they may not want to go just to meet someone for the first time, whether it's driving or flying, right?
You
Uh,
know, I
yeah.
don't think there is any purpose to meet face to face in business. It's all opens doors to corruption. The meetings have to be over Zoom, recorded, analyzed, and proceed. And there will be much less harm to companies and their shareholders if everything will be transparent, recorded, and analyzed then.
And yeah, exactly. And so when you look at the pandemic, I think there's the so much death, so much destruction. If you look at America, it's almost like I often joke that it's like the scene. There was a show called 24 where there was split screens at the end of the show with Kiefer Sutherland, right? And it was set in the future, but back then with this counter-terrorist unit CTU. But in many ways, we've been living sort of this split screen of multiple crises. First the pandemic, then insurrection on the Capitol, then George Floyd. Before that, and then riots and protests, and then recently we just had another gun shooting in San Jose, and I was going to talk about it at the end of the show. So every single time there's some negative incident happening, all this uncertainty. But the one thing that is certain is that we have rebounded. So we are now seeing restaurants open, theaters open, concerts come back in the park, people walking without masks. There's an energy and buzz in the air because people want to see each other, right? Now, I got to admit, when I go for a run in the mornings now, today I ran 9 miles to honor George Floyd with our fire chief in Morrisville, right? I felt really tired. I hydrated. But when I see you guys, my energy level picks up because I'm a people's person. But I'm seeing you and feeding off your energy without actually seeing you in person. So this is a good point that Sasha makes. Is it really necessary? Maybe this is the best way to do business moving forward, and that our in-person meetings are more on building those relationships, creating that trust. But at the same time, these kinds of technologies have been accelerated. So like now, I don't have to go to meet someone. I could get on a Zoom call today at 11 to meet my technology guy. I'm having some IT issues, and save 30 minutes of having to go there, right? So
That's
that
very true. And along those same lines, I actually just yesterday, one of the boards that I sit on is the Carolina Theater, which is you're talking about theaters opening and things of that nature. And we actually did our virtual fundraiser yesterday. So it was a silent auction and a performance space. So it was like, along with the silent auction was some concerts and things of that nature. The concerts and the music had all been pre-recorded. There were a few people that were there at the theater. I think they, in talking to one of my fellow board members, I think they said there might have been about 20 or 25 people, but a lot of folks were watching this fundraiser, Back to the Future. We used the Back to the Future theme from that classic movie and everything. And, in just a 1 day event with that silent auction, and there were some great items, including some trips to, I believe, Mexico and a number of other places. And the last figure I heard was that we had raised for the theater something like over $100,000. And that was in a 1 day event that was very much of a virtual event. So yes, these virtual spaces are also finding ways to bounce back companies and even industries that have been in trouble. So like I said, the theater hopefully will reopen sometime in the fall in the sense of in-person events and all of that. Jacoby, who was there with us at the meeting, mentioned that our local minor league baseball team was open and had about 40% capacity, but they're expecting to be at full capacity of about 11,000 by this coming June. So actually, in about a week or two, they're expecting to be at full capacity from the 40% capacity that they're at right now. So definitely, we are seeing more and more of that going on as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And Sasha, is this happening in Canada? Are we seeing more people? What's the vaccination rates in Canada?
Vaccination is doing really well. It's brilliantly organized, and I think that's the reason, in fact, why they decided to open mid-June, is to wait for 2 full weeks until a large portion of people, at least in Ontario, I'm not sure about other provinces, will be vaccinated. So it will be by beginning of June, which is in a few days. Probably 70% of population of Ontario will be having at least one shot. So another plus 2 weeks, so it will be mid-June, things will start reopen slowly. And it's not like everything will be open by mid-June, but things will start to reopen slowly, one at a time. Schools are still closed. There is no decision on schools yet. But I would like to offer my opinion on something what you discussed before about a need for people to see each other and so on. Okay, I have an interesting take on that. I have no doubts about what you mentioned about leisure travel, and people really want to go places, see new places or even old places, but just get out of the place where they spent last almost year and a half. That's no doubts about that, no brainer. Now, talking about seeing each other, see what's happened is that the last year was very controversial in many respects, from politics, from economic, from just any point of view. And in the last a year or so, maybe it's a little bit longer than that, but for sure during the last year, there became, but people continue to communicate through Zoom, through phone calls, through just whatever. So you still communicate. But there are lines, red lines, and some other lines, and people join one of two universes, whether it's a liberal universe with its heroes and influencers and spokespeople, and there's I don't know how you want to call it, Fox News universe, where there are their own influencers and prophets and all kind of people. So most of the population, they already made up their mind to which universe to belong. And if you meet people from another universe, there is nothing good about it. There could be a fist fight, and if you don't need fist fight, you might as well not to meet that person, even if it's your family member. It doesn't matter, because this polarization is very serious. It's nothing to easily be dismissed. So therefore, I don't believe that there is a huge need to meet each other, because, as I said, if you're in the same universe, so you talk to each other probably daily anyway, and you agree on everything. So what's the need to see each other? Just to reconfirm what's already been done. But if it's a polarization with the opposite group, then you might as well better not even see them. In fact, you can't even communicate with these people, so you might as well not see each other.
I hear what you're saying, Sasha, and it's interesting because actually I was just reading a friend of mine's column that he puts out and everything, because sometimes the polarization isn't even on racial lines or on political lines. Sometimes it's just along various other lines as well, because he was actually talking, as my good friend Carl Kenny, but he was talking about how he felt almost like he had lost a past relationship because he was seeing this area where we're at, kind of like bonding together and joining together. And he was even remembering a novel event that we did several years back, where people came together across different groups, different ethnicities and everything. And basically, it was a novel event, but they basically married Durham. So they married the city of Durham, and it was done strictly as a novelty and all of that. But they went and did that event, and it was about bonding the city together, getting people across the different divides that we have, whether that's gender, whether that's orientation, whether that's race, whether that's environmental concerns, or even the age differences and all of that. And actually some other cities around the United States, and I think even around the world, kind of adopted this kind of novel event that was done. But he was talking about how recently here in our city, there have been divides even among some of our political action committees. And it's kind of, played out in some of the discussions around city managers and school boards and things along those lines. So he was feeling as if he was losing some of the luster of staying here in this area, even though he's still very much of an activist and all of that. So as you were saying that, it was making me reflect on what he wrote on his blog just a couple of days ago about how he was feeling that same kind of way, that, of that wishing that there was more unity, and also wishing that people would be transparent when they come out and do some things in their community, because sometimes that can also be an issue as well. People sometimes will do things in the midnight hour and not be as transparent as they should be. So that was just interesting how you made me think of that and reflect on Mr. Kinney's editorial, which is along those same lines.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's just been an interesting. That's a great point, Mark. I mean, I think that, and the other thing I would say before we get into some other issues, because I want to ask you guys about another issue that's surfaced locally in your home city of Durham, is that I think that the one thing this pandemic has done is, I think if you look at science, that's been a real success. So when you look at how quickly these vaccines have been able to be developed and manufactured, now it's yet to be seen whether we're going to be able to vaccinate the developing nations like Africa, like India. That's the next challenge, right? But I
Very
think
much.
the acceleration of digital technology, the acceleration of this mRNA research for vaccination could have a profound impact on cancer research, right? But at the same time, an issue that I'm going to talk about on Friday, tomorrow, is education. How far have our kids fallen behind with virtual school, right? Are kids going to be affected by this now, moving back? Have they lost time, or are they going to be able to get it back, right? Now, I'm hearing studies, if you go and look at other countries, and you compare United States, our kids actually spend less time in the schools when you add summer break and all the vacations, right? And is that going to affect the future of the workforce and the talent? That's something we don't talk about, right? So there's unintended consequences. And then the final thing is the gun violence.
Yeah.
So, every time there's a crisis, it's over, and then here we go again. San Jose, 10 people dead. And I just feel like we're going in a circle. No gun reform, no George Policing Act, can't get the votes in the Senate. So you have a lot of these great ideas. I just want to throw that out there, guys. I mean, I think that
Well,
I
it's
call it
interesting.
mini plots.
No, it's many plots, and there's many plots going on in the country. Actually, I had the pleasure yesterday of having a young lady attorney who is in the field of immigration, and she was talking about some of the laws that are trying to be passed by our Congress, even in that space. And she'll be on the show again next week. We did more of a teaser this time because she came in toward the back end of the online dinner party. So she'll be coming back next week to have a more detailed discussion. But we did talk briefly on the show because she was on for about 15-20 minutes around some of those immigration issues and get people at least interested in some of those things. And that's some of those mini plots. And we're still waiting to hear some of those things, whether they're going to be passed or not. And I don't think the George Floyd law has been passed yet as well. So there are a number of these things that we're still waiting to hear about, as we see the political things going on in that regards.
Absolutely. And then the final piece of it is the political, right? I mean, and I think that's something we should talk about today, or maybe even tomorrow, is now that Joe Biden has successfully completed or almost completed this goal of 70% of Americans vaccinated by July 4th, as he puts the pandemic behind him from a vaccine, healthy American, we may not get herd immunity, assuming the economy gets back, right? Assuming that he can get some of these bills passed, like the American Rescue Act, American Jobs Act. What is next for this president? Is it, his first test was Israel and Gaza, right? He's dealing with Russia, right? He's dealing with, we haven't really talked much about Korea and the element in the room, China, right? And so I think that's going to be the next test for this president is how can he lead America in a post-pandemic world? And how can he be strong on foreign policy? And while we're all saying this, let's not forget that as we speak, more and more people are coming to the border.
Yep, and that's part of the...
And Donald Trump is coming to North Carolina June 5th to speak to the Republican convention. The first time he's coming from Florida to speak, and he's coming to North Carolina. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Sasha, what is your perspective about President Biden's next chapter? I think the first chapter of this presidency, which I call the pandemic chapter, is coming to a close for him in the U.S. Now, he's got to lead the world now in terms of helping India and other countries. But as he turns the page and begins chapter 2 of the presidency, Sasha, do you believe that's going to be foreign policy, diplomacy? Is he going to have to start coming out and telling us what he stands for?
I think the less he speaks, the better for him. Really. Each word has a lot of weight if he doesn't say it too often. So the best what he should do is just to keep quiet and to get the natural forces from left and right and so on, take its course. And only once the situation is more or less certain, then to say. But now there will be much less guessing words. It will be much more appropriate, everything, whatever he will say. And he can do quite well. And I think he might, surprisingly, he might go into history as the greatest president of all times. It's very few people think that way. But I think he has all components, in fact, to do it.
Already comparisons being made between him and Roosevelt. But let's not forget Roosevelt. Under Roosevelt's administration, here's what's amazing: 1,000 airports were established or modernized. The Rural Electrification Act, which provided electricity to most rural areas, bridges, roads, major highways, infrastructure, all of this being done while 3% of our GDP was spent on research and science. Now only 2%. This president, I think there is some similarities. The call for 500,000 electrical vehicles, the call for broadband, the call for $2 trillion worth of infrastructure improvements, including clean and renewable energy jobs. $6 trillion all total together. $6 trillion when you add the American Rescue Act, the Child Care Plan for families, and then the American Jobs Act. Now, but I think the difference between Roosevelt and Biden is that Roosevelt had the houses of Congress and the Senate. This president,
that's very true.
President,
hold on one second. Definitely glad that y'all are having this engaging conversation. But our amazing guest has popped in as well. So we've got Fran here with us and everything. So I wanted to bring her into the conversation. So definitely, Fran, I'm glad that Nick reached out to you and wanted us to learn more about the amazing things that you are doing, both in the business and the charity community. So I'd love for you to share a little bit with our audience about amazing things that you're doing, and hopefully you can help as we engage you in conversation.
Hi, thanks for having me. Much appreciated, and thank you for being so patient. I'm not very good at calculating the difference in time zones, it seems, so hence why I'm late. My apologies. Do you want me to do a bit of an introduction?
Yes,
please, if you
please.
would mind.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Fran. I'm based in Sheffield, which is in Yorkshire in England. I work as a consultant, so I support businesses, social enterprises, and charities who are fundamentally purpose-driven to try and be more impactful and be more sustainable. My background is in the charity non-profit sector. So I previously was the chief exec of a housing charity here in Sheffield, which was responsible for, I guess, expanding the amount of affordable, decent accommodation that was available to homeless people. And I chair the Social Enterprise Network here in Sheffield as well, which is a supportive community of social enterprise professionals who are looking for kind of increasing advocacy and more support in the policy landscape for their social entrepreneurial activities. So yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Sounds great. And I know one of the things that we're always fascinated by is purpose-driven nonprofits, purpose-driven organizations in general. So I was just wondering how you came about that whole space in terms of wanting to run not just a business, but a business that actually had a purpose and a cause. Because a lot of times, even here in America, a lot of folks, when they think of entrepreneurship, they think about, it as being a tool to I hate to put it this way, but in some ways, get rich quick and things of that nature. But it sounds like you definitely are a cause-based organization, but still showing that you can be an entrepreneur within that space.
You're absolutely right. I think increasingly I'm noticing that there's a blurring of those lines between what is the non-profit and what is very much purpose-driven and what is a purpose-driven business. So we're seeing increasingly businesses be regarded as for-profit and primarily for-profit, also looking at how they can have a greater social and environmental impact. So we're sort of starting to see a bit of a blurring of the lines between the kind of traditional charities and social enterprises to the whole spectrum where we're
Mark, are you there? She must have frozen.
Did she freeze?
It's not me. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, she froze. So let's see if we can see what's going on there. But I'm always fascinated by that. And while we're working on that, we'll see what Sasha's got to say about nonprofits and being very socially functional kind of organizations. Because you're an investment person, and I see that she's not frozen now. So do you ever do investment in that kind of space and all, where you're kind of like invested in companies that are also doing great causes, whether that's like being environmentally conscious or being conscious about other issues and things of that nature? Or when you're doing your investment, is that not even something that you put as one of your criteria?
It would be nice to say that I invest in environmentally friendly projects and some innovative projects or whatever. But you see, it's much more complicated to that. There must be certain criteria met before you decide on investment. There are several strategies involved, like options trading, the covered call writing, the put writing. There are a lot of techniques involved, and sometimes, it's kind of a tale of the tape when you see what tapes you telling you, and it requires you to act in a certain way, and when certain parameters are met, and there are very advantageous to you and your strategies, the last thing what you will think about is whether the company is environmentally friendly or not, or some other social issues. So they're extremely important. However, it's not the first criteria in investments what I would follow.
I got you. Miss Fran, one of the things I was curious about is how do you deal with the whole trying to be environmentally conscious in your business decisions and all of that, when we're seeing all of these power players that are making these power moves on the bigger corporations? Like I know that recently we just saw here in the United States, Amazon buy up MGM. And of course, one of our other people oftentimes talks about the big global tech and media companies that are out there kind of controlling even that media space, whether that's Google or whether that's Amazon or whether that's a number of the other ones. as well. So I was just wondering, how are you able in London or in England to actually make that space and to make those maneuverings around? Because I do find it even here in North Carolina where I'm at, I've got a friend that works with a company called Green to Go. So she's trying to do more like making sure that we're not wasting and doing a lot of things that are environmentally bad. Because a lot of times restaurants and things will be using plastic and styrofoam and other things that we know are not good for the environment. So she's actually making sure that they're doing things that are more environmentally friendly. So I was just wondering how, if y'all are doing some similar kind of things, and what are some of the conscious efforts that you've been doing in your work to make sure that folks are doing things like in that conscious space.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we see here, I think, increasingly since the pandemic, we've seen a kind of consumer shift towards the smaller local business. There's been a much greater awareness of the impact that businesses are having on the kind of, socially and environmentally. And there does seem to be this kind of movement where people are voting with their feet, and they're not shopping at Amazon anymore. They're shopping at the local, wherever down the road, which is fantastic to see. Obviously, in very, very tiny amounts, this isn't happening quickly, or by any stretch, this isn't happening quickly enough. But what is happening is those companies are being increasingly held to account. So we have, for example, here we have some regulation around procurement. So when statutory agencies commission services, when they enter into contracts with providers or suppliers of products or services, they have to be able to demonstrate their social and environmental impact in order to qualify for that piece of work or for that contract. And so there is a sort of increasing movement to support businesses to just be a bit more mindful about the impact that they're having, and they'll be scored on that when they're bidding for public sector contracts, which is some kind of incentive or leverage to hold against these companies, to try and encourage them to be a bit more conscious about what they're doing. But just increasingly, I think it's the kind of power of community. We're seeing like this resurgence on social media where people are getting really kind of vocal, and they've got this platform to say, actually, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm not going to stand up for this. These companies they're just not going to get my money. And the more that power grows, the more companies have to change the way that they operate, because, they're going to lose customers if they don't.
Yeah, and I think that there's actually a local entrepreneur that lives in Durham. Fran, thank you for being with us today. He lives in Durham. His name is Christopher Gergen, and his father is David Gergen, who is actually the only American who has served as an advisor to 6 U.S. presidents, going all the way back to Nixon. Every now and then you'll see David Gergen on CNN. David Gergen is actually from Durham, North Carolina, which is quite amazing. And so, but Chris has a organization that he started called Bull City Forward, Forward City, and it's all about. Before the pandemic, he was talking a lot about social entrepreneurship, and this whole idea of, developing entrepreneurs that are more aware of solving problems where there's an impact. And I think as a city councilor as well, the one area where I see that is in sustainability. Right. So typically, I've always looked at artificial intelligence and technology as sort of the entrepreneurs, but we often forget that even if you read Bill Gates' book on climate change, he talks a lot about how he's investing billions of dollars in companies that offer plant-based meats, companies that are injecting carbon out of the cement, air filtration systems. He's the investor in a company where they found a microbe in Yellowstone Park that can develop plant-based, protein-based yogurt that tastes better. So all of these things are examples of innovation with a social conscious in mind. Yes, to make profit, but also to solve problems. And even when Bill Gates was asked on 60 Minutes about whether these companies could make a profit, he goes, I simply don't know. It's very different than the world that I played in with software, where I'm going to come up with Microsoft Word and then know how I'm going to do it, all these innovations that these companies got in. But we're going to need more entrepreneurs that come forward that solve these problems, right? Because, and the final point I'll make is what Gates was saying was that government policies are not enough to address climate change and hit our goal of net zero emissions. So he says, policies are one thing, but innovation can be a way that we can execute that policy, right? So that's sort of interesting. I would recommend the book to anyone listening today. It's his book on climate change. I know,
Definitely.
yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah. And Miss Fran, how did you get involved into the whole space of being socially conscious entrepreneurship and all of that? So I'm sure that folks that are listening would love to know more about what even drew you into being involved in this.
I had worked in charities for a very long time, for about 20 years, and increasingly grew quite frustrated because they were reliant on short-term funding. They were reliant on, fundraised income or trusts and foundations making one-off donations. And then once that money came to an end, they would go, they would have to start their fundraising campaign again. So their impact, the impact socially, particularly, that they were able to have was very much time limited. They would get to a point where they had done 18 months worth of a project and it was really successful, and then they had to stop because there was no more money. And for me, it was just incredibly frustrating to see this happening over and over again. And the particular charity that I was working for, we were working with homeless people, and we were trying to provide housing for homeless people that was affordable, that was decent standard, and that that they could stay in permanently or long term if they wanted to. And we were reliant on, again, short-term funding to do this. So we would get to the end of 18 months funding and realise, great, we've got these people housed and now we can't do this anymore. So we have to pull out and then everybody's homeless again. And it was just this ridiculous kind of cycle that we were going through. So we looked at how we could generate a revenue stream in the same way that a business would. How could we use the skills and the knowledge and the services that we provided, but charge for those? So not charging the beneficiaries, not charging the homeless people, but charging, in our case, we were charging property owners and landlords. So we would manage those properties for them for a fee and act as a real estate agent, lettings agent. And that became a business for us. And we were able to use the profit that we generated from that to cross-subsidize some of the support and charitable work that we were doing. So it was profit that was reinvested back into the charity. And the more I kind of got into this world, the more I realized that the whole heap of businesses, a whole bunch of businesses that are doing similar things in various different ways. So they're generating a profit, they're profitable businesses, but it's what they do with that profit that is the difference. So it's not going to shareholders, it's going back into the impactful work that they do. So here there's a bit of a loose definition around what makes a social enterprise, but arguably it's one that reinvests at least 50% of its profits back into the business to continue to have a social or environmental impact. So that's how I got into this world. And now as I said, I chair the Social Enterprise Network here, and there are hundreds of very small, albeit very small, but very impactful social enterprises doing very similar things. So working with all different types of social or environmental causes and generating revenue, generating profits through their trading of services or products, but using that profit to further their impact. So I think, to the point around whether or not these businesses are profitable, I think they can be. I think they can be incredibly profitable, but it's what they do then with that revenue that they're generating that I think is the key differentiator.
No, definitely agree with you on that. One of the things that even here in North Carolina, there's actually a great company here in Durham called TROSA, and they do a lot of work with people that have been gone through, I won't say abuse, but they were, substance abusers of one sort or another. I can't remember. I think most of them might have been in that drug space, and some of them may have been in that alcohol space. But then a lot of the people that come through the program and go through the cleaning and the detoxing and all of that, they also work for like some different companies that TROSA has established. They have a TROSA moving company, a TROSA store, and a number of other things. So it sounds like they're doing that kind of work as well. And I wish that more people that went into that nonprofit space knew something that you just mentioned earlier. My mom actually worked for years and was actually the first president for the Golden Leaf Foundation, which was came out of the tobacco settlement money here in North Carolina. But even she had told me many years ago when she worked at Z. Smith Reynolds that, a lot of times people are given these grants and they're given them on a fixed cycle. And the intention is that people will gradually get themselves off of the dole, meaning that they'll get themselves off of that system, meaning that, yes, they're giving them a donation, but they are a limited time frame. So it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might even be less than that, it might be 3. But the goal is that they want them to actually get off of it. But unfortunately, I feel that too many nonprofits don't necessarily understand that, even though it's taught in our school systems and things of that nature. And I think that they think that they can go from funding source to funding source and just live off of that for the duration of their entirety. And I find that that's why some nonprofits don't survive, because they keep doing that same kind of routine of just kind of like dependent on these agencies. And I know that even in the various parts of Europe, there are agencies just like there are here in America and around the other continents as well. So would you agree with me that too often the people that are getting this money are too dependent on the money, and that they need to be trying to think of business avenues to actually generate some funds in order to maintain their business life?
Wholeheartedly, absolutely agree. I think what we see, I don't know if this is the same in the States, but we see here that there are huge amounts of nonprofits, many of whom are doing the same work. So they're not talking to each other, they're not collaborating, they're trying to work in silos in their own areas, having a very small impact. Whereas if they joined forces and they became more sustainable, they may be able to solve the problem that they're trying to solve. And there's that, again, this over reliance on short-term grant funding without a view of what happens then. Use that grant funding, but then what happens in 18 months or 3 years when that money runs out? What's the plan? And sometimes I think it's perhaps a lack of business acumen in the sector. Sometimes I think maybe it's that there's this idea that making a profit in the non-profit space is almost frowned upon. It's kind of seen as, well, we can't make a profit, we're not allowed to generate a revenue that kind of supports us. We're reliant on these trusts and foundations, and I think it's just a misunderstanding of what that kind of whole concept stands for and what it means. Generating a profit that's then redistributed back into the organisation is a very different thing to generating a profit that lines somebody else's pockets. So I think part of it's just a lack of awareness that this is a possibility. That doing something slightly different or generating. Turning what you do into a business is actually okay. You can do that and use the money ethically and impactfully.
And along those same lines, how have you been able to deal with this whole pandemic? Before you came on, we were talking about how a lot of the business community has been going into the whole Zoom life and all of that. And I know a lot of people are suffering from Zoom fatigue and all of that frustration with it. But how is the nonprofit space, and particularly the nonprofit space in Europe, surviving during this pandemic? And I know that there are even parts of Europe that are still in lockdown and have not had as much of the vaccination as we have here in the United States. So definitely, how is that impacting the work as well?
It's been really difficult for many organizations, particularly those who are working with people who don't have access to the internet. They don't have smartphones or computers that they can log on to Zoom and have a conversation. So it's been particularly challenging for them. Lots of nonprofits have lost their fundraising income. So, marathons have been cancelled and events have been cancelled. So those events that would normally have generated sponsorship are not happening, or haven't been happening in the same volume. And so that money hasn't been coming in. And a lot of them have been reliant, again, on trusts and foundations, which means that they are massively oversubscribed, and it's becoming increasingly competitive to even get a grant from a trust or foundation. And many of them are just not going to survive. And at the same time, I think I've seen quite a lot of organisations who have completely changed their business model because of this for the better. So they've embraced technology. I've got some clients at the moment, for example, who have their business was it was a charity, but they were working as a social. They were running like an assisted fitness facility, so for people with chronic health issues or disabilities, and it was specialist equipment that they were using, and they would generate bespoke training programs for them. And obviously, because of COVID, they've not been able to do as much of that in person, so they've launched an online exercise program. So they're charging a fee for that. They're able to get that commissioned by the National Health Service or by private medical insurance providers. They'll buy that for their patients. So it's generated opportunities for people that have turned into, actually, this is a huge opportunity. This is something that we could expand nationally from our local kind of our tiny local presence that we had before. So I think to answer your question, some have really struggled, some have gone to the wall, and others have blossomed and seen this as an opportunity to become something much bigger and much more impactful than they had done before. So it's forced an evolution very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've noticed in everything is I've seen more and more people that have use this space that we've been in, and we were actually talking about this earlier as well, to do more global outreach as well. I've actually mentioned it. I've mentioned it a couple times on this show. Recently joined that app Clubhouse, and I've even seen social entrepreneurs using that app as well to like not just be targeting their individual nations and their individual countries and continents, but actually to make it more of a global conversation. So I was wondering, is that something else that you've been seeing as well, and not just using that app, but even like some of the other ones that are out there as well? But I've definitely seen more global conversations, and even global conversations around social entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, I was on a call, I think it was 2 days ago, and there was a young lady out of South Carolina, and she's actually doing some social entrepreneurship work as well, actually in the similar space as you're doing. She's in that housing space, and also I'll actually have to put the two of you in touch with each other, but it sounds like y'all are doing some similar work. But I just wondered, are you finding that kind of networking going on a global basis?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I was the exec of a local charity until February last year. And I resigned in February and left in May after I worked my notice period, and I walked straight into the pandemic. I didn't see that coming. I decided that I wanted to set up my own business and thought it would be a local company that worked with local charities and local social enterprises. And actually, I've been working with people all over the world. So I've been using Clubhouse. LinkedIn has been incredible. I've met people I'm working with Collective Brains. So they're based in Washington. They've got mentors all over the world. I've been, just speaking to some people in Canada, Australia, working with the social enterprise community based out of Melbourne. Some people out of South Africa, just everywhere, just all over the world. And it's just been because I haven't left this room. I've been in this room for nearly 18 months now, talking to people from every corner of the world. And I think everybody's kind of had this experience where, we're suddenly realizing you've got the same problems in North Carolina that we have here. It's not just us, we're just in our little corner of England here. This is a global issue, and we're talking to each other and realizing that we're not so different. Actually, we've got the same challenges. We might call it something slightly different, but it's the same thing. It's the same problem, and learning from each other.
Fran, it's been an honor to meet you. I'm going to have Mark close out the show today. I have to leave a little bit early today, but it's been an honor having you. And I did want to let you know as I close out my monologue, and Mark, if you don't mind, I'll close out. It's been an honor having you. I had the honor of meeting the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, about 2 years ago. He was on a fundraising tour on Alzheimer's, and I actually thought it was my best friend playing a joke on me when I got a call from the British consulate, a guy named, and I thought it was a joke. And the funny thing is, it was in the small hotel in Morrisville, and I thought I was in the wrong place. I was asked to welcome him as a city councilor, and he walks in, and it was the former prime minister. I couldn't believe it. And we spent an hour with him talking about Alzheimer's. And so who would have known, right? And there was no news coverage. There was no media coverage. I got a picture somewhere. But it's been an honor having you on the show. And tomorrow, folks, we'll be talking about education and also defunding the police. So some interesting stuff in Durham where Mark, the city council is talking today about moving 20 positions into a community policing department, and they might have violated open meetings laws. But I want to have this conversation about defunding the police. Is it sort of the wrong word? Are we talking about reinvesting dollars? Because anytime you use the word defunding, it has negative connotations. But Fran, thank you so much. And Sasha, thank you. And we'll be back tomorrow for our Build Back Better plan, where we talk about the future of education. Thank you, Mark.
Yep, no problem. And like I said, I know we're going to wrap everything up. Sasha, did you have any, before I bring up that whole great outro that we do and everything, did you have any quick question for Fran before we get ready to wrap everything up? Because we did still have a few minutes. I knew that definitely Steve had to step out, but we still got a few minutes left. So did you have any questions based on what you were hearing from Fran about some of the work that she's doing? Oh, hold on a second. I got to unmute you. That's my fault.
Okay, I have a question to you, but it's not related to what Marco was just asking, and perhaps not related to your work at all. But as a highly intelligent person, I would like to know your opinion. What do you think about critical race theory?
I don't really know anything about critical race theory, if I'm honest.
You do. Mark, do you know anything about critical race theory?
Well, I mean, critical race theory has been something that's been definitely been used a lot in the conversations here and everything. And part of it is using race to discuss issues and things of that nature. That's the way I think of critical race theory. But some people might paint it in a different light. But I think of it as being using race, ethnicity, and using that as part of the discussion. And I think that there could be some arguments, and this is just my knowledge of history, that it's even gone on in other countries. I would imagine that there's probably been some discussions around racial issues even in London, because I do know that there have been some folks that have come from other parts of the globe, be that Africa or India. And then I also understand that there are people that were even in the can't call them African American, but Afro-European kind of communities as well that are there as well. And I know that sometimes that's been a discussion that has gone on in the past, because I remember that even during the Black Lives Matter movement, there were people that were talking about the race relations that existed in other parts of the world. And I know that that's something that's even come up in London and other parts of Yorkshire and other parts of the whole English nation and all of that. So I guess a better way of phrasing that question, Sasha, is how are things going in terms of race relations there in London? Because I know that that's probably the way it would be framed in the context of critical race theory to ask Sasha's questions. But I was wondering, how are things doing in terms of racial communications there? Because I know that in the past, it's not just been an American problem. It's been a problem of different ethnical divides, both here as well as there and other places. And that might even come back to some of the work that you're doing in that kind of being a conscious kind of space of trying to make sure that you're tackling difficult issues. And I imagine race is a difficult issue, and it may even play to the housing issue, because I imagine that some of those folks that you are taking care of in housing are coming from Asian and African populations, or some of the poorer populations there in the whole English area.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I understand. I understand now. Yeah. So okay. We saw the aftermath of the George Floyd shooting here. It was certainly represented in we had protests and a lot of social unrest because of what happened, which is still continuing. To be honest, the area that I live in, there were huge protests, which was really great to see, and I think it's brought it to the front of people's minds, in a way that perhaps it hadn't before. So we're questioning all the narratives that we come across now, from employment practices and recruitment practices through to the way that police act. We don't have the same level of concern around police brutality, police issues here. Obviously, for various different reasons, but it's still being questioned constantly, and the narrative is on the news all the time. In terms of my kind of how it applies to my role and how my previous role, Sheffield, where I'm based, is a dispersal area for asylum seekers. So we would have a lot of asylum seekers who'd come over from Europe, from beyond Europe, from parts of Northern Africa, and who were placed in asylum accommodation here. So basically what would happen is they would be placed in accommodation pending the outcome of their asylum claim. So whilst they were in accommodation, they would be housed by the Home Office. And then they would get a yes or a no as to whether or not their claim had been approved. And after that, they would get 28 days from the point that they received that letter to say, yes, you can stay, to the point that they were evicted from that house they were provided with, which, if you've not been able to work for the entire duration of your asylum application, and you've come from somewhere where you've kind of fled persecution or torture, and you've landed in a country, in a city that you don't know, and then all of a sudden you're given 28 days notice to get out of the house that you live in with no money, no access to to a deposit or to any mechanism to get on the housing ladder, no job, no support network. There's just nothing. So what we ended up seeing was, people would go into asylum accommodation, become, get their refugee status, and then be evicted. And we were seeing huge communities of people who were street homeless, who were living on the streets because they had no mechanism to move forward in their lives. So we, one of the things that we did in my previous role was we managed properties for homeless people. We had specific housing that we had set up for refugees. So we did a huge campaign to try and get our resources translated into the languages of those communities that were coming through, to make sure that people knew that as soon as they got that piece of paper on their doorstep, they needed to come to us, because the statutory services were useless. They weren't doing really very much help at all. So then they would come to us, and we had then 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, if we were lucky, to find them somewhere to live, to prepare them to move into that accommodation and to move on. But that was us as a voluntary service, a non-profit service, later a social enterprise, acting on the basis of what we could see, what we could observe. And we were only able to do that because, we had the autonomy to be able to do that because of our business structure. But that doesn't exist in other areas. So, I just find it astonishing that we're in this position in the 21st century where people are coming to the UK in search of a better life, and they're told that they can stay, and then given no support whatsoever to be able to get on their feet and to find a job and to move on into the community and to reunite later with their families. Often they wanted to bring their families over from the country that they've fled from, and they couldn't do that because they couldn't get a job because they didn't have a house, and they didn't have a house because nobody told them how to go through this process. So to your question around race relations and how that applies, I think there's a glaring hole in public policy here in terms of how we welcome people as new refugees and new arrivals, and then what we do to enable them to move forward with their lives and contribute to the economy and reunite with their household and just kind of become an active citizen. So I think if that's representative of other aspects of public policy around the race issue, then I think we've got a huge long way to go.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And as we get ready to wrap up, one of the things I was going to just ask that I know Nick would be curious about as well is, I know here in this area, he oftentimes talks about the fact that he feels that our education system, meaning the United States education system, is in the 18th century, even though we're in the 21st century, meaning he doesn't feel that we teach a lot about fiscal issues or even about like how to run nonprofits or even about a lot of the basic core issues, like even, the public knowledge of the Constitution here in the United States and things of that nature. So I guess my question to you would be, do you feel similarly about that situation in the whole UK and everything? Because I know that Nick has oftentimes talks about that he feels that we are definitely in the 18th century in terms of what we're teaching, but of course we are plainly in the 21st century. But I was wondering, do you feel similar there in the UK?
Yeah, really do. I was just having this conversation at the weekend with a friend of mine who's a special needs teacher, and she was talking about how the system is designed for children who are able to pass exams, who are, these exams that have been predefined based on an outdated mode of what is perceived to be intelligence. So that comes from, I guess, from the Victorian era, where we were preparing people through the workforce to become employees and to become a number. And there's nothing around, identifying people's personal assets and their potential and understanding, what they're able to offer and contribute and, to give to society. And so I think we increasingly see a kind of certainly a north-south divide in the UK and a rich-poor divide and a divide across the races because of the way that our education system is designed. It's designed for those children who are, sometimes able to access private tutors or that extra kind of the extra education that a bit of money gets you, and for those children who are not, for whatever reason, not able to access that same level of support, then they're at the bottom of the pile. And because we've designed this system around outdated modes of what is perceived to be success and intelligence, then these children are growing up with a level of self-confidence that's, that's in their boots. They've got so much potential, and they don't have the mechanism, not designed with a mechanism for them to be able to fulfill that. So, yeah, I think we're incredibly outdated. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm pretty sure that we've got it very, very wrong here.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And like I said, and like Steve said, definitely glad that you were able to join the show. Definitely share a little bit about what you're doing. If there's ways that folks can reach you, I'd love for you to share that right now. And then after you do that, I'll bring on our closing video that we use all the time was actually the opening and closing video. But if you can let folks know how they can reach you, I'm sure that folks would love to have that happen. And on the behalf of Nick and Kim and the other folks, I would love to have you come back again on this show or on some of our other shows. So I'm sure that we would love to see you come back and even share more of the work that you're doing.
Thanks, I really appreciate you having me. And sorry for being late once again. Yeah, so you can reach me. I'm on LinkedIn, Fran Ferris-Ockwell on LinkedIn, and I'm on Mantle, which is Mantleco, MANTLECO.io. That's my consultancy website.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.